Okay, so the burning question that everybody's been keeping themselves up at night with, right? Okay, maybe not, but for somebody who is interested in what is the difference between a two-stage and a single-stage um, oxyacetylene torch regulator, basically it boils down to on a two-stage regulator, like both of these are, the delivery pressure which goes out to your torch is much more stable as the pressure in the cylinder decreases. And practically speaking, that's it. So that's the end of the video, right? Fucking nobody wants to watch any further than that. But so, like I said, both of these here are two-stage regulators as indicated by the two caps on either side there as such. Um, and for those of you that are more curious about this and want to watch a ridiculously long video about this, then I guess we'll get into it. Um, so both of these are obviously Victor two-stage regulators. I personally am really only familiar with Victor, and I can't really speak to anything else. Obviously this one here has got some funky stuff on it, and can you see that in the video? Yeah, I think you can. All the shit that's on there. Um, and also it's weird that this one has a low pressure gauge on the delivery side. But that actually works out fantastic for my individual purpose for this thing, which is not the point of today's video. But so I have got this set to about 5 psi, and let's see if I can zoom in on this a bit more here. I guess I should get both gauges in there. So with the gas flowing, we're right on 5 psi. If I see, what cylinder am I on at the moment? If I open the valve to flow gas, we're right at 5 psi. If I were to turn off this cylinder, simulating the cylinder running empty, we can see that our pressure stays essentially exactly the same, dips down just a cunt hair, comes up to not quite 6 psi, and then drops off. And so that's what these things are so great for. And if we're curious to see what that looks like with a flame on it, oh, and I should say too that I'm recording this video out of order, which you'll see here in a minute. And so I'm probably gonna ramble on about a bunch of bullshit and everything that I'm sure most people don't care about. But okay, so we got the cylinder turned on. I'm only going to turn off the oxygen cylinder. The same principle applies with with the acetylene cylinder, but just for simplicity's sake, I'm only going to turn off the oxygen here. And so we get a nice happy flame going here as such, and reach over and turn off the oxygen cylinder. And so again, this would simulate the cylinder running empty as you are using it. Is that turned off all the way? I guess it is. I'm just not using much gas here. So a little under half capacity in the cylinder simulated. Okay, next time I do this, I'm gonna open up the valves more so this doesn't take for fucking ever. And just goes out like so. So now I will switch out the regulators for single stage regulators. So the regulator, the oxygen regulator that I'm going to use is going to be this guy here, a single stage Victor. I actually forget what model this is. SR450D. I use this one because it is the closest comparative to this two-stage, because they are both the 400 size front cap that's on here. This issue, if we even want to call it that, still occurs with the smaller regulators here. This is a single stage SR95. And I'm not going to use that because I actually need to do a little work to this thing, and because this is the closest to that one there. This one here was really a fantastic regulator to use to show how stable the pressure is on this, because it has that low pressure gauge on there. And obviously, like I said, this is a rather weird setup on this regulator. If you're curious to see more about this, I will make a video dedicated to this regulator and what I'm using it for sometime later. I've been busy as shit with work recently, and so YouTube is not exactly a priority. Okay, got the single stage regulators on here. This is the SR91 from one of my previous videos that I replaced the seat inside of it. Unfortunately, I've just got some shitty Chinese gauges on there for the moment while I get the other ones fixed. But I did think it was rather interesting. I don't know if it's a gauge issue, if it's a problem with the regulator or what, but the pressure on the acetylene seems to change a fair amount whether the valve is open or closed. I feel like some of my other regulators don't have that much of change. And I guess funny that we're talking about this. It'd be interesting to have a two-stage version of that one there. And then got this oxygen single stage on here. Of course, this gauge is set, or like this is a much higher, this delivery pressure gauge is a much higher delivery pressure gauge, or much higher pressure delivery gauge than the acetylene or the other oxygen gauge, but you can still kind of get the idea of the concept of what's going on here. Get a little bit of change just with turning the valve on and off, but if we have it set to, I mean, I don't know, what's that, maybe 10 psi or something with the gas flowing. If we then go and turn the cylinder off, simulating the tank running out of pressure, you see how much change there is on that gauge there. And actually, when the pressure comes up as well, too. So I will light up the torch and we will take a look at this with the torch running. Big fire. Okay, so nice happy torch. And so that is the practical difference between single stage and two stage. Hopefully you can hear it in the video, and it comes across well, but you can actually hear a fairly significant difference in the flame as the oxygen pressure starts to increase as our tank pressure goes down. Now, is that a big deal, and does it matter to you? That depends on what you're doing. A K cylinder like this, a 250 cubic foot cylinder, lasts a very, very long time with a welding tip on it like that was there. So, it it wouldn't be that big of a deal if you're just welding with it. That having been said, though, as the cylinder would deplete, if you were holding the welding tip the entire time, as the pressure increased, as you could hear hopefully in the torch there, it goes from a neutral flame to an oxidizing flame, which would be a bad thing for welding. So as the cylinder would bleed down, you would either have to adjust the delivery pressure of the regulator or mess with the valves on the torch body itself. Scatterbrained, holy shit. Whereas with the dual stage regulator, as showed previously, the pressure changes extremely little. It's nowhere near what this one does here, and probably wouldn't make any bit of a difference with a welding tip on it if you were to run from a completely full cylinder to a small cylinder. Now, that is not so much a big deal on a large cylinder like this, because chances are you're not going to deplete a large cylinder like this, say welding, but it would be a much bigger deal, or you're not going to quickly deplete a large cylinder like this with a small welding tip, is what I should have said. Where this becomes more important is actually if you had a cute little small, like say 20 cubic foot cylinder or something. I'd imagine you'd see much more of a benefit with a two-stage regulator there. Victor makes several sizes of two-stage regulators. I don't know how small they go, because obviously having this large of a regulator, say on like a little 20 cubic foot oxygen cylinder, would kind of be a goofy thing. And the weight of the regulator, if it was a two-stage like the other one, it'd probably knock over a fucking 20 cubic foot cylinder. But I think it's kind of funny. I was watching a couple, I say it's kind of funny just because I find it funny that people don't have more of a curiosity about things. I was watching this video of this guy on YouTube that had a really nice set of, I think they were Smith, if I'm not mistaken, two-stage regulators. And he was just getting into using torches and, the hobby that he was in and what have you. And the reason that he bought the two-stage regulators, quite frankly, was just because someone told him to. And he didn't know what the benefit was in two-stage versus single-stage, which, not making fun of him for that, because nobody's born with this knowledge. We have to learn it at some point in time. But I did think it was really funny that, his thought process on it was, well, I bought two-stage regulators, which are a lot of money if you're buying them brand new, because someone told me that's what was best. And it's like, okay, but best in what regard? It definitely wasn't best as far as cost was concerned. It is best as far as, accuracy of pressure is concerned. But anyways, there you go. That is the difference as far as practically using them. The pressure is much more stable on a two-stage than a single-stage regulator like this one here. That having been said, for most people and the way you use torches, it's not a big deal. Just every time that you turn the cylinder on, you either adjust it to what you want, or, if you leave the adjustment set where it is, then you just have to come back and essentially turn the pressure down a little bit to adjust the delivery pressure for the change of the regulator as the tank pressure goes down. And then, so now this is the last part of the video that I'm recording, but is the first section that I'm going to clip into the video section. So for me, it's the end of the day. But in all reality, now we're going to look at why there's the difference between the regulators, how the regulators work internally, and the components inside of them. And so this here is a different two-stage regulator that I am just cleaning up and fixing a couple things inside of it. But if we look at this regulator here, literally all it is two different regulators in the same body. And so here's the front cap for it that has got the adjustment hand wheel, and then on the back side here there is the second cap that is adjusted by this grub screw, but it is essentially just a duplicate regulator. And so the high pressure gas comes in to the back side of this seat assembly, and this seat gets pushed down based on the spring tension that is on the diaphragm, and it allows gas to go through those two holes there to the backside of this like secondary, if you will, seat assembly. You have the low pressure gauge here, and we can see the drilling, like the casting, if you will, for the high pressure gauge goes to the backside of here. This drilling here is for the pressure relief valve. Like so. That would stick into the bottom of there. And then with this rear cap on, the way that you adjust the pressure on this is to stick a gauge into the pressure relief valve port and turn this in until you get your desired pressure. Now, I don't know what this one here was originally set up as. I'm going to use this one here as a propane regulator, and so I think I'm going to set the primary stage regulator to 250 psi, and I will get this onto a cylinder and adjust that and show you the process of that next. Okay, so here is the regulator on an argon cylinder that has approximately 750 psi inside of it. And I have the front cover off just to make sure that this seat is sealing and no leaks. I can't hear anything, so that's cool. Now, on one hand, it's kind of ridiculous to have a two-stage regulator on propane because propane is never that high of pressure. I think the relief valve in a propane cylinder is like 400 psi or something like that. But I have this regulator, so it's kind of a case of smoke them if you got them. Obviously, I had to change the nut on this regulator just temporarily to be able to put it on this argon cylinder. Reason for wanting to put this on here is to get the primary regulator set to the pressure that I want, and I don't currently have a heater for my propane cylinders, so there's not a, like, yes, I can, heat up a propane cylinder to get it, above 250 psi, but I don't have like a electric blanket heater for a propane cylinder yet, and so this was just kind of easier. Anyways, I put a cap in where the high pressure gauge would normally go because I have a 400 psi gauge that I'm going to put on here, and obviously the 750 or whatever that's in the cylinder currently would damage that 400 psi gauge, and I don't actually care what the tank pressure is right now. So when I put this cap on here, there was actually a little bit of spring tension just simply threading the cap on, and so you can see I have the adjustment knob completely loose here, and we're still, what, 120 psi or whatever. But if we turn this up here, we will slowly start gaining pressure, and see, what am I going to go to? I'll go to 250 for shits and giggles. I guess that sounds appropriate. Oh, I kind of forgot. So you can actually hear that leaking already. So this was originally set, we can see, at 400 psi, but I actually took the spacers out of it because I wanted to reduce that pressure a little bit. And I was curious to see. So right now it only has a spring inside of it, and so apparently we're at like 230 psi on that, which that is not high enough for what I want. So I will take that back apart. Oops. Take that back apart and add a spacer to it and see what that gets us. So on this pressure relief, there's just simply a spring and a seat in there, and I'll show you here in a second, but I thought it was kind of interesting that as I back off this here, I'm reducing the spring tension on it, and you can see it is relieving the pressure in there slowly. And so what's inside of these? Come on. Oh, the whole thing came out. Okay. And it's fine and no worries that the whole thing came out. Just, you know, one hand on the camera, the other hand trying to hold on to this shit. But so there's a spring and this plunger, if we want to call it, and you can kind of see the wear mark from where that plunger was riding on that little O-ring inside of the pressure relief valve. And so this had the two spacers in here. That one's, I don't know, I'm going to guess maybe 10 thousandths thickness, maybe 20 thousandths thickness, something like that. And I want this to relieve slightly higher than it was before. Well, maybe 100 psi higher. And so I'm going to put the thicker one in there, the thicker spacer, and then put this back together. Kind of a snug fit. It kind of binds up going together, but once it's in there, it actually moves nice and free. So stick that back in and see what we relieve at now. So of course it says on it, relief do not alter 400, but fuck them. I will alter it if I fucking feel like it. So slowly turn on the cylinder here. So at like 210, where we were before. And ideally, I would like this to relieve at about 350, because I would like this relief valve to go off before. Hey, look at that. I'd like that one to go off before the relief valve in the propane cylinder goes off. So now I'm going to push this pin in to bleed down the pressure in there, and probably need two hands for that, so I'll pause it and come back. So bled down the pressure, and then like I said, I want approximately 250. say about like so. And then I got the acorn nut here and a tightening wrench for that. And I'm curious to see if this is gonna move. Hold the regulator with one hand while I tighten it. So got that snug down, and that didn't really change it. And so yeah, close enough, about 250. So here's the normal regulator that I have on here with dual flow meters on it. And so that was, yeah, about 750, 800, something like that was in the tank. So yeah, that's really all there is inside of these things, is just simply two different regulators, or yeah, I mean, two different regulators in one body. So I'm missing, this is the front seat on this one here. I'm missing the little brass cup or whatever you want to call it on the front side here. So I need to get one of those. But this here is how a seat assembly would come out on a single stage regulator that doesn't have the nut on the back side of the housing. I'll show you that here. So these three here are all single stage regulators. You can see they don't have the second housing on the back side. But if we look at these two here, you can see this one has a nut, but it does not have a second diaphragm on it. And also, I guess, interesting to point out that on this one here, this solid nut is centered on the main housing. This one, like this regulator that I was just showing, you can see this cap over the primary diaphragm for one has the ventilation holes on it so that it can allow atmospheric air in there, but also that this is off center from the body, the main housing of the regulator. So what this nut is here is, this nut here is just simply how you access the seat for this regulator, which is quite convenient because then that way you don't have to take the front housing off of it. Oops. Okay, give me a minute. Okay, so yeah, single stage oxygen regulator with the nut on the backside. Take the nut off, and your seat will pop out the backside there, and there is the sealing surface for this one. This one here has got quite a bit of wear on it from the spring. I need to get a new one of those, but I rather like this design because it's just very convenient and easy to get to the seat on this one. But you can see that, you know, just this nut has to be in the center because that's where the seat rides behind the diaphragm, is right in the center of the diaphragm. And so on these two-stage regulators, there's just an interference issue with the primary stage regulator. There's not the room for the nut. So on these, in order to get to the seat, the front cover comes off and then this pops out like such. And so both, and so, okay, yeah. So if there's the nut on the backside, just the nut, not the entire housing, then that's how you access the seat. If it is flat on the backside, like this one is, then front cover has to come off to get to this style. These three regulators here are all the like 400 series regulator with the largest size front housing on it. And so I'm not going to pull this off and check it, but I would imagine that these would actually interchange just fine, and I'd imagine they're the same thread pitch and all that. You can also get this style seat access on the smaller regulators here. So this is a rather old, like 250 size regulator. It's a single stage. This here, again, is just access to the seat. Pretty sure I explained that in the most rambling and complicated way possible. So, yeah, long-winded deal on that, but I guess it at least is informational, I would hope. But so, the reason that the pressure goes up on a single stage regulator as tank pressure goes down is that if this here, if this here were a single stage, then when you crack open the bottle, the tank pressure will come in through here onto the backside of this seat, and so you'll have tank pressure back here, and then like hand wheel spring pressure on the front side here, because you got the diaphragm that sits right here, and the diaphragm is actually the little brass piece on the diaphragm here is what actually pushes on this to open up that seat. And then we have spring and thrust plate, if we want to call it that, with the front housing, and you adjust spring tension by turning down the hand wheel. Obviously, the further you turn down the hand wheel, the more pressure on it. Or the further you turn down the hand wheel, the more it compresses the spring. And then the reason for the holes is so you have atmospheric pressure on this side of the diaphragm, so these regulators will automatically compensate for atmospheric pressure. But you for one have to overcome this spring force on the backside of the seat assembly, but also you have to overcome the pressure on the backside of here. So with a fresh cylinder, say of oxygen, you've got roughly 2200 psi on the backside of this seat. So in order to push this open, we have to push against that full 2200 psi of tank pressure. As the tank pressure starts to drop off, it becomes easier and easier to open this or to push this seat in. But if we haven't adjusted the hand wheel on here, then the spring pressure on the opposite side of the diaphragm remains the same. So if spring pressure and atmospheric pressure remain the same, but tank pressure reduces, it takes less force to open this up, thus increasing the delivery pressure. On the two-stage regulator, we of course have two regulators. And so in the case of this individual one, as you just seen, we regulate the primary one on this individual regulator down to 250 psi. And so that means that this seat here will have roughly 250 psi behind it the entire time as the cylinder depletes. Now, this regulator here is prone to the same problem as this regulator, being that the pressure behind this seat will change as the tank pressure goes down. And so the feed pressure to your secondary regulator, if we want to call it that, will change as tank pressure depletes. However, it'll be less of a change on a two-stage than it will be a single stage. So like say, you know, I adjusted this one at 250 psi at 750 psi tank pressure. So maybe at 2000 psi tank pressure, this would be, you know, I don't know, let's say maybe 240 or something like that, maybe 230. And then as the tank runs down, say 300 psi, maybe it would go up to 250, 260 something. So maybe this seat will be dealing with a pressure differential of say 220 to 260, something like that. That is obviously a lot less than 2000 down to 250. And so that's why these are more stable, is that this seat, the one that you actually adjust with the hand wheel, has much more stable pressure fed to it. Of course, once the cylinder drops below what this regulator is, then the pressure behind this seat here will also drop off as well. But as you've seen in that first little part of the video here, there is actually a fairly substantial difference on these two-stage regulators as to how accurately they can control the pressure. But so hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully I did half a shit worth of a job trying to explain that there. I'll get this regulator back together and I'll put it back on the argon cylinder and just verify function. So got it mostly assembled, and on the cylinder here I just got this in here to plug this, and then of course I can't have the 1 gauge in there because the tank pressure would blow it up. And I'm just curious to see what pressure I can turn this up to. There's still a little bit of thread left. It's getting hard to do though. Okay, so that's pretty well maxed out how much thread I have there. So what, like 220, something like that. I'm not gonna make you watch that. And so there it is, all put back together with its appropriate hardware and such. Oh, so I don't know what the deal is with this one here. Of course, obviously it says Victor on the front of it. The hand wheel says Victor, but then on the side it says Betchel or something. I don't really know what the deal is with that. Serial number 3 million and change. So this is obviously a fairly new regulator, especially compared to the others that I have. I bought this one used, just the same as essentially all the other regulators that I have. I think I've only got like 2 that I bought brand new. Some that I got new old stock. Actually, I forget if I've showed those or not. So I'll go grab one because it's a pretty funny size comparison to this here. Even just like, that's a kind of crazy size difference here. Kind of give you some idea. But these, near as I can tell, these were new old stock when I got them. Either new old stock or had been used like one time or something, but these are Victors, and oh shit, 200,000. What? I really want to know how the serial number works. Well, okay, no wait, 200,000. Yeah, okay, no, I guess that makes sense with the age of these things. 253,000. And what's this one? 254,000. And so, especially with these here, what's that? Oh, crap. Drop the adjustment screw. Okay, so 254,600. 253,800. So 250,800. 254,600. So 200. So he's like 600 apart. So very reasonable to assume that these were sold as a matching pair. And I would imagine the difference in the serial number there is that, they would manufacture acetylene regulators for a week, and then the next week they would switch over to oxygen or whatever. But near as I'm aware, these are the smallest regulators that you can get with the standard 510 fitting on them for like a normal acetylene cylinder. You can get, I think they're this size, that have the little thread on the backside of them for the little tiny MC acetylene cylinders. But the reason I got these was for one of my work rigs that I want to keep on a weight and space budget, because these things here are actually very small, obviously, and they don't weigh very much in comparison to this two-stage regulator here. And this is even with these shitty Chinese modern gauges that are on here. And I don't have a scale handy, but as you can imagine, these weigh considerably more than those there. And I guess kind of loop back around to it here a little bit. So on one hand, it's really ridiculous to use a two-stage regulator like this for propane, because the pressure in a propane tank is primarily affected by the temperature of the propane. And assuming that the temperature of the tank stays the same, the pressure in the tank will remain effectively constant, whether it's at 99% capacity or 1% capacity. And propane at like, I don't know, 70 degrees or something like that probably has a tank pressure of about 100 psi. Propane, unless you live down in Phoenix or you have a tank heater like I'm going to put on my propane tank, propane is relatively low pressure. This, like I said, was a case of smoke 'em if you got 'em. I had this thing lying around and figured I would clean it up and use it for propane. This one, like I said, is very modern compared to the other regulators that I have. What the fuck were we? 200,000? Can't even remember 5 minutes ago. 200,000 on those serial numbers, and what the hell did I say? 3 million. Yeah, 3 million on this one. This would obviously get even heavier if, like the other oxygen regulator that I have, that you had old school gauges on it, because those weigh substantially more than these modern Chinese fuckers. And I don't have a matching oxygen regulator to this one, but that's the other thing I was going to say, is for now, I'm going to use it for propane. Maybe I'll use it for some other gas in the future. This regulator I paid way too damn much for, but I didn't know to look around like on eBay and shit. That two-stage oxygen regulator I actually bought on eBay for $42. It really kind of blows me away how cheap you can buy some of this stuff if you're just willing to look around. And I really want to find a matching pair of old two-stage regulators like that oxygen regulator, and I just haven't gotten lucky enough to find one yet. Of course, that's the annoying part about buying stuff used, is that you can't always find exactly what you want. That having been said, you can still find really good prices and what have you, and potentially you can potentially find exactly what you want, like in the case with me for that oxygen regulator. What else was I gonna say? So yeah, I put this on the argon cylinder just to set the primary regulator pressure. And in the case of this fitting, the CGA 510, and I think this is the 580. So near as I can tell, the stem, like the male portion here, is the same between the 510 and the 580, and only actually the nut changes. And so all I did was take this out, change the nut, and then you can thread this into a inert gas cylinder. So like 75-25, pure argon, helium, nitrogen, that kind of thing. And I don't know if the seat material actually changes on these things between the different gases or not. But I'm going to assume that it'll be fine. So yeah, I guess that was the other thing that I was going to say. So I said earlier that this thing being set at like 350, it'll relieve before the propane tank relief valve does. I don't know why the hell I said that, because this is seeing regulated gas from the primary regulator, not straight from the tank. So I don't know why I misspoke and said that. I was just not thinking about that correctly or what have you. Oh, and then obviously in the beginning of this video, I had this on a acetylene cylinder, which is, potentially sketchy or dangerous, because you can turn the pressure all the way up to 220 whatever psi, but so long as you're aware of what's going on and you don't be a jackass, then everything's going to be cool. Oh yeah, so I got into an argument with a guy the other day who had this old, probably from the 70s, I would guess, 70s, 80s, something like that. Nothing terribly old. He had this old single stage acetylene regulator, and a couple people that he was talking with were saying that it was not worth fixing that old regulator and that he should just throw it in the trash, because the diaphragm was likely worn out in it, and parts were obsolete for it, and you couldn't, quote unquote, couldn't rebuild it anymore. And I got into an argument with a couple people over it, because these larger, and the particular regulator that we were talking about here was, I think, a 460 acetylene regulator or something, but this size single stage regulator. As you can see, both of the diaphragms in this one here are stainless steel, as well as actually all the other regulators that I showed in this video, with the exception of these guys. I haven't opened these up yet, but I would assume that this has a small rubber diaphragm in there. But all the other regulators, like I said in this video, have got stainless steel diaphragms in them. And those smaller SR91 regulators that say San Francisco on the front of them, the acetylene one anyways, doesn't even have an O-ring behind the diaphragm like this one does here. But even then, you know, if you've seen the other videos, you can still get parts for the old stuff. Sometimes it's just a little bit more difficult to get the parts, and you got to call around and talk to the right guy to get parts. Okay, I think that's it. I think that's all